Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very unique, probably my first seminar, where we talk about where we as women and menstruators have the opportunity to learn about really cool things about the way our body functions and how we can leverage those cycles in our professional lives. When Elizabeth told me about this concept, it blew me away. I was like, oh my gosh, mouth fell open. My name is Kavitha Ness. I am a consultant working mainly with startups and nonprofits and strategic marketing. And my career has spanned from working in tech and corporate entities. Most recently, I spent over a decade at SiriusXM. And for me, this seminar is so important because I just think our menstruations affect so much of how we affects our whole lives and then hence work. And I've always worked predominantly with men, older men, and it's been really hard to bring up that I am menstruating and that it affects my energy levels or even brain fog and all of those things, and to be able to kind of affect my schedule so I can produce more important work that syncs in with my cycle is just mind-blowing to me. And while we focus on our body in menstrual cycle and menstrual clock, for many of us right now, our bodies are telling us we need to grieve and that we're angry. And I think this seminar is going to really help you learn about your body and lean into the signals it is sending you, and I believe we'll really walk out better in touch with your body and better resource to work in alignment with it. So with that being said, okay, today's seminar is sponsored by MatchPace, which is an organizational design consultancy that helps organizations improve their bottom line by increasing their team's focus, satisfaction, and work style. You're going to get a taste of all that today. I've worked with MatchPace before, and they really lean into a lot of the headline topics about working better, more efficiently, and not necessarily this 5-day work week and things that we see that don't work in this day and age. And Elizabeth will take us a little bit more through that. Today's agenda, just to give you a quick look at how today's going to proceed. The time's going to be, it's about 1.5 hours. Start off with introductions. And then the first part is a ChronoPace seminar led by Elizabeth. She'll take a few minutes after our seminar to answer any technical questions about ChronoPace and clear up anything on that methodology that you don't understand. We'll save questions for the whole entire presentation about menstrual cycle and work and implement it in for the workshop and Q&A at the end. Take a 5-minute break because we're women, we need to pee, and we might have our periods. And then we'll get into the menstrual cycle seminar, and we'll have a shorter Q&A after that piece with any technical questions about my menstrual cycle syncing. And then finally, there'll be workshop and Q&A. How do you implement this in your own life? We can talk through any challenges we're facing, and then we will end our time together. So we'll learn about Elizabeth, who we mentioned before is the founder of MatchPace, an organizational effectiveness company that helps teams work well and live well. Elizabeth does everything. She's a good dear friend of mine, but more importantly, she consults, coaches, writes, and speaks on the importance of work in a way that prioritizes humanity. She's the author of Work Reimagined: How the Power of Pace Can Help Your Organization Achieve New Levels of Focus, Engagement, and Satisfaction. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband. I almost said 4 husbands.
4 husbands, no.
Might make life a little easier. And her 4 elementary age children. Her husband's a rock star, as are her children. So 4 children, 1 husband.
That's the math there.
Yeah. No dogs or cats or gerbils yet. And we'll also learn about our menstrual cycles from Alyx Coble-Frakes, and I think I said that right. Alyx started the Agenda.Period, which is a planning system and app that helps high-achieving women use their cycle to improve their productivity and impact. They bridge a gap in the understanding around the menstrual cycle and strive to help women and menstruators understand the nature and power of their cycle in order to inform strategic planning and professional endeavors, which is such a worthy cause. So before we get into the actual sessions, Elizabeth and Alyx, can you just briefly share a few ways cycle syncing has helped you, popcorn style? Tell us out a few ways that you've benefited from knowing your body clock and menstrual cycle.
Alyx mentioned it earlier, but in case people are just joining, she and I talked about our menstrual cycle and we realized that we're not far off from each other. And so we planned this seminar to have it at a time when we would both be in follicular or ovulation phase. We would have higher energy. We would feel more like kind of our prime selves. And so that's one way that cycle syncing has benefited me, is that I know about it and I can plan important things around it.
Yeah, I love that. It's also really helped me beyond work. It's helped me with my relationship with my husband and my relationship in parenting, because I just know there are times in my cycle that I have less bandwidth for other people's BS or even for like some of the additional, like I have twin 18-month-olds. And so they can be really needy. It's normal, it's developmentally appropriate, but it does not always feel good for me to meet all of those needs. And we're really expected to do that without feeling guilty or bad and without complaining about it as women and as mothers. And so just knowing sometimes I have less bandwidth for that allows me to ask for support without feeling guilty. And it also, I tell my husband like, hey, dude, you know where my cycle's at. Don't come to me with anything wild right now. Like I'm not going to handle it well. Just know that and be smart about it. It's really helped our marriage and our relationship because these things are happening. Our energies are changing. We can ignore them or we can use them for our advantage. And that's what I really prefer to do.
Yeah. Alyx, I use the Agenda app because it goes to my Google Calendar. And then I also use Clue. And Clue, you can record symptoms and everything. And so I've recorded PMS enough to know that I get a little cloud on the calendar. And so everything will be okay. Everything will be okay. And then all of a sudden I'll have this day where I'm just like, "Rah!" And then I'll look at my phone and I'll show it to my husband and I'll be like, the cloud has arrived. Yeah. And then also not just menstrual cycle, but body clock. Similarly, knowing that about myself, I'm an early bird. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm a really early morning person. So, and I was finding a new therapist and I found someone who had availability at 6 a.m. And I was like, that would honestly be great for me. Like, that is when I feel like I can be most present, because most therapy appointments I've always had like after work or something. And that's not a good time for me to be able to be present in myself. I'm too tired. And so I took 6 a.m. therapy appointments because I knew that I would be in a better place for that.
And I'm the opposite. I am not an early bird. So I do not like to schedule a meeting where someone's going to need me to nitpick something. I mean, obviously I look at my cycle. There are times where it's not good for me to nitpick anyway, but like, I don't put those meetings really before 10 a.m. I don't like to schedule clients before 10 a.m. because I want to be the best coach to them. And I want to just be the best and most efficient self in meetings. And so really for me, it's like midday on is much better than early morning. And if I have to get up early, I don't really want to talk to anyone for like an hour after being awake. So try to plan with all of those pieces. You can see like knowing this information about yourself is so important. Makes a really big difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks to you both for that preview. I can relate to so much of what you're saying. Can't wait to get into this. So Elizabeth, we're going to start off with your body clock. You're a early morning bird, which I can't understand people like that at all. I'll hand it over to you, and folks, go ahead and put your Zoom on presenter view, and that'll make me and Alyx smaller and Elizabeth while she's talking, and vice versa when the different folks are talking. And if there are any questions, put them into the chat. And as we said, there are a couple different points where we'll be able to answer that throughout this seminar. All right, guys, go for it.
All right. So actually, speaking of this early bird night owl thing, a couple of months ago, our handyman was at our house at 7 a.m. and he was chatting with 3 of my kids. And he said, "Where's your sister?" He was looking for the 4th one. And they said, "She's sleeping." And he said, "Oh, being lazy, I see." And I love our handyman and he is great. And he was trying to make small talk with a few small children. So I'm really not at all concerned with what he said to my kids, because as we talked about, I talk about menstrual cups with my children. We talk about body clocks. But I am concerned with this concept that we have in our society that rest equals laziness and the early birds are the only ones who get the worms. And so I'm just curious for all of you, toss it in the chat. Have you ever felt like there was something wrong with you if you're not an early bird? Or have you felt, even maybe, felt that way yourself, that rest equaled laziness? Because that's what I observe is sometimes the message that we give. And so I'm curious if people are, I'll let you toss it into the chat. But here's the deal. My 6-year-old is not lazy. She has a natural rhythm. This is a picture of her the other night, unprompted. This was her at 8:30 when her early bird sister was literally crying in the other room because she was so tired and just needed to go to bed. And so we just have these 2 different body clocks in our family. And so this is my daughter, Elena, and she's had this, this has been her since birth. And so when we ask her to get up early for school, she's slow moving, she's painful, the way Alyx and Kavitha are describing themselves. And that's because she's working against her natural body clock. But every night at 8 p.m., it's party time for her, which is a bit of a strain for me. And so the big theme of today in us introducing you to your body clock and your menstrual cycle is to show you how, when you know about these things, they can get you closer to your professional goals. Knowing yourself through these and other lenses is a really powerful tool towards being more effective at work. And that gets you better results for yourself and for your organization, gets you better interaction with your team. It helps you truly improve the bottom line of your organization. And so if you stick with us here and you apply the things that you're hearing about, you'll add hours to your days and days to your years. Knowing this about yourself and working with your cycle when you can and making accommodations when you can't will help you get closer to your goals. Before we talk about the benefits of this, I want to talk honestly about the costs of working against our natural cycles, the costs of the current ways that we're working. If you're like most people, your days are probably pretty long and pretty choppy. I've read lots of articles that say that the average person keeps their phone right by their bed and rolls over and looks at, social media and even their work email first thing when they wake up. And it's quite possible that by the end of the day, you do one last check at night. And then in between those, on those 2 different bookends, you have various meetings that are often spaced kind of just so inconveniently apart so as not to give you enough time to get work done. You'll maybe have Slack messages that have no defined end. And we've built a pretty fractured workday for ourselves. It's expensive for our brains. It hurts to change focus so much. And it's also expensive for our organizations. Frenetic work environments lead to fractured and burned out employees who don't do a great job on the mission, and that has bottom line costs. And so the question is, wait, how did we get here? How did we get to this style of work? And so for most of human history, the average person didn't travel more than 30 miles from their home. Most families worked together out of their home. Subsistence-based cultures where extended families worked together to provide basic food and shelter, early economic times where families had a home-based business, and they partnered with their community and family members for their for their work. And then these jobs changed with the time of day and the seasons of the year. You worked a lot and you had opportunities for rest, the heat of the day, after harvest, that type of thing. But for thousands of years, your life was relatively predetermined for you. You grew up in the same place you were born. You likely worked the same job as your parents. Most people did get married, but you only had one community to find a spouse in, so you better hope you liked the options. Then the Industrial Revolution came along, and that started in the late 1700s in the US and began to move us from subsistence-based work towards mass production. And that took the concept of work away from the home. For factories to work, everybody had to be there at the same time, and they were there for a long time. Factory owners were trying to maximize their investment in machinery, and it resulted in exploitation. It resulted in really inhumane work conditions. And by the 1920s, they finally caught on. Henry Ford and some other factory owners, with a lot of help from organized labor, recognized that the way that we were working was inhumane and that it led to diminishing returns on longer days. They realized that people could actually produce more with less errors in shorter periods of time if they were more focused. And so they changed the workday from kind of never ending to 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. So that was about 100 years ago. And Ford was not making that decision out of generosity. He was looking to maximize profit. He realized that he was working in a way that was costing him his mission and money. And so now we've moved into this industrial economy, or sorry, from this industrial economy into a knowledge economy. And the way we're working has changed yet again. And we have different productivity tools that, if used correctly, can help us make decisions faster, communicate more effectively, and generally do better work in less time. But the main tool that we're using, it's not our bodies, it's our brains. And the thing is, I think you all know this intuitively, is that our brains operate differently than our bodies. When our bodies are doing manual labor, our brains are doing mental labor. And there are a lot of studies that show that our concentration wanes the longer we're at work. We become less efficient, we take longer to make decisions, we lose sharpness and focus. And so we have the law of diminishing returns in a knowledge economy as well. We get less, the longer our workday stretches, the less we get in a return from it. And that's just the long hours part of our day. Remember what I said at the beginning about how most of our days are structured. They're full, those long hours are full of scattered meetings and pings and kind of frequent interruptions. And so Dr. Gloria Markham, who's out of UC Irvine, found that the average knowledge worker is interrupted 17 times an hour. So if you think about that, that's almost every 3 minutes. And some of those interruptions come from people who have legitimate needs, your employees, your boss, your colleagues, maybe children, maybe spouses. And they might be poorly timed, but it's people who need information from you to do their work. And then some of them are not, some of them are legitimate needs, and some of them are not so legitimate needs. And we have a hard time sometimes distinguishing between the two. And then some of these interruptions come from ourselves. We have twitchy fingers that like to go look at something else. A lot of times when our brains are tired and we're faced with a hard task, we would rather scroll. So if we're interrupted 17 times an hour and it takes us 15 minutes to regain our focus, it's almost impossible to get work done the way that we're currently working. Our brains get tired. We're committed to a certain number of hours a day, but it doesn't mean that those hours are actually a good opportunity for creativity and productivity. And so we need to design our work days to maximize our brain power on our most important priorities. We need to reduce distractions, interruptions. We need to discourage multitasking and truly structure the workday to get work done. Probably most of us who are on this call are working from home again, but it's not in our family's fields or in our family's bakery. We're working for dispersed organizations, and we are expecting ourselves to work almost nonstop. And so that takes us back to the costs that I went over at the beginning. This type of work is costing your organization its mission, and it's costing you your own peace. Just like Henry Ford realized that the way that he was working was making people work in his factories was not actually accomplishing his mission. We're back at that same place again. The way that we're working is costing us our mission and costing us our humanity and costing us our peace. And so what do we do? And it's time to reimagine how we work. And that was there's my plug for my book there, but I wrote a whole book about how we need to really think strategically about how we work, not just retread agrarian days where we had to work all day just to survive, or our industrial days where we all had to be in the same place at the same time doing the same thing. So we don't want to just add tech tools on top of things that we've been doing. We actually want to reimagine how we work. And I don't have all the answers. I'm excited that we don't have all the answers. It's an opportunity to figure things out. But one way that we can think, there are so many layers to this possibility of reimagining work, but one way we can think about it is through this lens of our chronotype, which is your time type. And if you lean into your time type, you'll actually become more effective and productive and get more and better work done and reclaim some of your time. So that takes us to the ChronoPace. On the registration page, there was a link to the ChronoPace test. If you haven't gotten to take it yet, don't worry. It'll go out in the materials after the seminar, and and you'll get a chance to take it. The most important thing for you is just to think about how to lean into this. And then once you get some guidance on times, you'll know how to slot things in there. The ChronoPace is our take on the chronotype. Chronos is one of the Greek words for time. It means hourly time, like hours around on the clock. And then there's Kairos, which is experiential time, which I would love to go into, but we don't have time today. The ChronoPace assessment will tell you what kind of pacer you are. So we talked about strong early birds or night owls. And then there are actually 2 other types in the middle of the day. And as I said, the biggest thing is realizing that you can maximize your work when you work in alignment with your body, because you're going to have energy peaks and you're going to have energy valleys. And so what I want you to learn, what I want women to learn, what I want my daughters to learn is that there are natural rhythms to our bodies, and we have the opportunity to embrace them and enjoy them. And if you lean into them, you can actually be a lot more effective at your job. So how do you use the ChronoPace? And I'm seeing myself, and I'm actually realizing that the slides are not showing up. So I will, or at least this slide isn't, but so just know that there was a slide for this. The first thing is to remember that your brain isn't a machine. It can't run all day and produce the same outputs. And so you have to be really intentional about when and how you ask your brain to do its best work. And it turns out that your natural body clock is a really good indicator of when your brain is primed to do your most essential work. You have peak energy times when your brain is firing and ready to go. For me, that's first thing in the morning. And your body also has non-peak times or energy troughs. And I can see those in myself as well. After 3 p.m., I'm kind of toast. And then I'm sure you've heard the line of overprotective parents who say, like, nothing good happens after midnight. For me, nothing good happens after 8 p.m. Unless I have like a very specific deliverable due first thing in the morning, I'll get online to work and I will wander around the internet for hours. And so if you think about that, I'm putting my time in, but I'm not producing anything. And so that's why, we want to kind of disentangle time from work. I mentioned the term essential work. And so what is that exactly? You may have heard the term deep work. It was coined by a computer sciences professor here in DC. His name is Cal Newport. And it's basically the super important work that you want to do without interruption. And why did we change the name? Why don't we just call it deep work? He talks about deep work as though it's all solo work. And we know that that's not the case. We know that so many of us need to collaborate to do our most important work. So we call it essential work. So slight tweak. But I'm going to ask you now to take a minute or two, and I want you to write down your essential work. This is the stuff that really moves your business forward. It's the stuff that helps you do the essence of your job. It's the stuff that is tied to your absolute most strategic priorities. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and do that. And then if somebody's comfortable tossing in the chat 1 or 2 of your essential things, it would be great. So Kavitha said biz dev. Yep. Building pitch decks, strategic pitches, product road mapping, development meetings, right? Yeah. So these are the things. Lauren Nelson says strategic planning and designing presentations. Yep. Yeah. So these are the things that actually move our business forward. These are the things where we want to have our top energy. And then there's other stuff that we have to do. And so we call this sustaining work. Again, we changed the Cal Newport language because he calls it shallow work. And I just don't think that that's adequately recognizing the importance of the other things that we have to do. These are the things that keep you functioning, that keep your organization functioning. And I don't want to be too prescriptive here, because something that is sustaining work for you might be essential work for somebody else. Maybe for a lot of us, expense reports are sustaining work. We need to put them in once a month. It's just something that we have to do. We need it to move our business forward. But if you're a bookkeeper or a CFO, expense reports are super essential. So I'm going to ask you to write down some of your things that are sustaining work, things that are keeping your business going, but likely aren't the kind of immediately tied to your strategic priorities. And go ahead and enter a couple of those in the chat as well. So I actually think Katie's name somehow got tied to somebody else. But someone who said keeping records in my CRM so that my research isn't on a ton of Post-its and legal pads. Exactly. Yeah, that's really important. All of the bookkeeping things. Sonia, hi. I don't know how you got connected to Katie, but glad you're here. And yes, that is sustaining work that needs to be done. You can't pretend that that's shallow work. Danielle says review of project update meetings. Yeah, you want to have that learning cycle. You want to keep things going, but those things probably don't require your best energy. They probably, require like you to pay attention to them. Maybe for me, they wouldn't be done. They wouldn't be good at 8 o'clock because I can't pay attention to much of anything, but in some of my lower energy times during the day. And so that's what I'm actually going to ask you to do. I want you to go look at your calendar. So now you've got a list of essential work and you have a list of sustaining work. And if you took the ChronoPace, you have an idea of your body clock. But even if you don't, just pause for a minute and think like, hey, when do I feel like I'm at my peak? And so I'm going to ask you to make just one change, but I want you to take something off of your sustaining list and move it to your peak time. And I have an example from my calendar up here, and it's October of 2022. I don't know exactly which essential work I'll be doing there, but I have blocked off things on a weekly basis, and I've arranged with my husband and with caregivers that 3 mornings a week, I'm not responsible for the kids. I love them. They're amazing. And 4 days a week, they get my best energy. But 3 days a week, I make sure that I am out of the house or hiding in the attic and I can really focus on my essential work. So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and look and see if you can block off a time on your calendar. If the most important thing you do is with someone else, after we get off of this call, consider sending them a message. You can ask them to take the ChronoPace as well and get a feel for their body clock, but see if you can move your meeting to at least a time when it's not in both of your energy valleys. And we've done this with teams and we've heard from them that it actually does make a difference. It's just changing the time of a meeting, but sometimes, team meetings are just updates. And so when they look at how the team is oriented, but they have an update, they have an update meeting Tuesday morning at 8:30, it's like, that's actually peak time for a lot of people. We should move that meeting to the afternoon. And then that gives people back their time to do their most important work and moves the sustaining task to its rightful place in the calendar. So I'll give you a minute to make a change or two. Okay, so I have been doing this long enough that I likely know some of the resistance that you're feeling. So I'm going to try to anticipate some of your questions and help you. In a minute or two here, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask technical questions about it. Like, was there something unclear? And then at the end, we're going to workshop. So you can, at the end, you'll be able to toss into the chat, I really want to do this, but I'm running into this, and we'll workshop it with you. But I am anticipating a couple of the questions that you might have. And the first is, this is all well and good, but I work for a company. What can I do about this? So my first answer for that is that's why MatchPace focuses on organizations and organizational change, because if you are an organizational leader, you have an opportunity to set the pace for your organization. And if you work in an organization, you might be able to move a meeting or two for yourself, but you are largely working in an environment that may be designed to be fractured and hectic and kind of all over the place. And so that's why we focus on organizational change. But that being said, a couple of things about that. One, I run MatchPace and even I have meetings that I can't move. I have West Coast clients who sometimes their early afternoon meeting is smack dab in the valley of like just the end of my day. But I know this about myself and it means I can work with myself. And so I block off time earlier in the day. I schedule time for a rest. I go for a walk. I accommodate the reality of my schedule and my body. I don't pretend. Every once in a while, we all have to power through. I get it. But we should not have to power through all the time. And so as much as I have control over it, I really try to work with my body and make gentle accommodations. And then also, even if you can't change everything, you can likely find 1 or 2 times to block off for yourself. I don't get to have a perfectly paced day every day, far from it. See children, see clients, see, all sorts of things that people who need me, and they have legitimate needs. And I'm not even trying to get perfectly paced days every day. But if I give myself 2 to 3, I aim for 3 because often something comes up and I only get 2 per week. But I've realized that 2 is enough for me. So if I block off 3 and something comes up, I have 2, and that's enough for me. And so I can't change everything, but I do take back some control in a couple of areas. And it's enough to keep me energized for the week. And then another question we have is, do chronotypes change? And yes, they absolutely do. It's, we kind of, as a society, teens need to sleep in later. That's why there's lots of conversation right now about starting high school later, that high school shouldn't start so early. Generally, teens, the way that their chronotype works, they need to sleep in later. Senior citizens tend to get up earlier. So you may have an inclination, you may have a strong inclination. My daughter, Elena, literally night owl since birth. I have this video I took of her like squeaking at 10 o'clock. She was just so delighted. And then my other daughter has been an early bird since birth. But I could see those things changing. And sometimes when people take this quiz, it helps them uncover some of those changes. Either, they get the quiz results and they're like, I've always thought of myself as a night owl, but really I'm this, late afternoon pacer. And that's helpful. Or they get the results and they're like, I answered the questions as I've always been, but I realize that doesn't feel right anymore. And so that's why I said to you, the results, like if you don't have them right now, it's okay. You probably have a sense in your body, or you can react to the results. And you can say, I'm not sure if that's it, and make a slight change, but your chronotype will change over your life. And it's always, just a chance to examine yourself and learn from yourself. And then this is one of my favorite questions. This means I have a lot less time than I thought I did. And that is exactly the point. These endless days that we're working aren't working. And we need to focus only on our absolute top priorities and deprioritize things that don't get us closer to the mission. We have this other tool, it's called a pace setter. We are very branded at MatchPace, where we help people prioritize from top to bottom what is actually most important to them. And where it always comes out is that they have less time for work than they thought. And so I hope it's abundantly clear to you how important work is to me, how important good work is to me. I think work is one of the main ways that we solve the world's problems. I think work is so important, and it has taken on an oversized role in most people's lives. It's not good for our health. It's not good for our relationships. It's not good for our mission or our bottom line, because burned out and overworked people generally produce poor results. And so we actually, the way that our brains work, the way that our bodies work, even a 40-hour work week, I think is too much. And the truth is we don't actually work that long. The data, a lot of studies return that people do about 3 hours of work a day and some collaboration, and the rest of the time is all broken up. So we're telling ourselves we have these really long days, but we're only focused for a little while, but we still feel tied to work for so long. And so that's one of the ways we want to help people reimagine how they work. What if we really focused for 3 to 4 hours a day, had a couple hours for collaboration, and then recognized that that's it. That's how much good work we can produce, and stopped trying to put in more and more time and getting poorer outcomes. What does this ChronoPace chronotype have to do? This is another question, have to do with the 4-day work week or hybrid? How does this fit in there? So right now we are decoupling work from place and even time. And so we're in actually a really unique place and time where we can design almost anything. And so that can be exciting, and it can also be overwhelming. And so having more options doesn't mean the answers are easy. They're probably harder. And so organizational leaders have to take into account the organization's purpose, its stakeholders, the employees, who are one very important group of stakeholders made up of individuals with a lot of different circumstances and needs. So the answer is that it's complicated. And it's not going to be solved by a simple fix of just deciding to only work 4 days a week, or only have these days in and these days out. And so you have to dig into the work that you want to do and how you want to do it. And so my recommendation for leaders is to develop a plan for now. And I would really encourage you to steer clear of promises like you'll be able to work from anywhere forever, or using words like unlimited, because I think what we've been doing for the past 2 years is working through a crisis. It has not been actual remote work, and I don't know that this is the way that we want to design it. And so I would just encourage you to take some time to figure out the next right thing for now. And then the last question that we often get is, will this really make a difference? And you may be familiar with the term flow, which was coined by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I have worked really hard to learn how to pronounce his name. And he was a professor who coined this term of flow, which is the mental state when you are completely immersed in one activity. And now that I think about it, that's actually Kairos. So I mentioned Chronos at the beginning. That's our time around the clock. And flow is this experience of Kairos. And so research shows that people who experience flow on a regular basis have lower levels of depression and anxiety. And the opposite is true. A lack of flow can lead to depression and anxiety. And you are better positioned to enter flow when you're in your peak time. It's not impossible during other times of the day, but it's way easier when your body is primed for it. So taking your body clock into account will absolutely make a difference in the quality of your work and your mental health. So I really do encourage you. As you can see, I'm really passionate about this. I care so deeply about how we work, and I want us all to work better. And so that is the introduction to the chronotype. Your ChronoPace, that is your introduction to your body clock if you haven't learned about it previously, or a reminder. And I would just love to take a few minutes to answer technical questions about how I explained it, and then we'll workshop at the end. So if anybody has any questions, or Kavitha or Alex, even if there was anything that came up to you.
My mind is just spinning. This is so awesome. I can't wait to dig in deeper. And I've already looked at your work a lot, but I'm curious if people are at the beginning. So I'm at that beginning of the journey. I haven't really onboarded folks yet. I have some contractors that I work with, but how would you recommend kind of setting this up from square one as an organization? And what does that look like? And do you have a process that takes people through that mapping before they kind of worry about getting other people's stuff in the mix?
Yeah. So, I mean, that is the first thing, is getting your own self straight and figuring out, and then as an organizational leader, for you to figure out what's essential for your organization and what's sustaining, so that then you can be clear with people, like, these are the things that we need to be, really focused on. How do we structure them? These are the things that require collaboration and require in time collaboration. And these are the things that require totally fine to be done asynchronously. And so as the leader, if you can make that list for yourself and for your organization, that would be a really good place to start. And then you get the opportunity to learn about people's chronotypes, and you can layer them over yours and your essential work. And you're not going to hit everybody. That's absolutely, it's unrealistic. It's not worth striving for, but knowing this about each other. We had a teammate at MatchPace who was like the night owl I have ever met. She loved to work from midnight to 3 a.m. And that is not my style, but that worked for her. I could not move client meetings from midnight to 3 a.m. Although, trust me, if we had international clients, I absolutely would have put her on that project. But then, I knew as best I could, let's not ask her for a 9 a.m. meeting unless we absolutely can't avoid it. And so it helped her lean into her body type. It made me question, is this and if something was, if we had a client that needed to meet at 9 a.m., she was game for it. But we really just only did things when they were important. So that's what I would say.
And Elizabeth, you said, just as a reminder, you're going to send where people can take this test and everything at the end of the
session. We'll send the recording and any of the resources Alex is going to share the PDF for the agenda. So all of that will go out after the thing. Danielle's got a question. She and her direct reports all know their best times, and also a bit more on personality types, introvert, extrovert, and work to be conscious of it. And so she's saying she's already got this information figured out. And so it's really helpful for her to know. And it really helps them accommodate each other. So yeah, I'm so glad that that is working for you, Danielle. Cool. Got, is that one more chat? A Q&A. Someone used a Q&A. Alyssa is asking, does my research reflect that folks with ADHD and executive dysfunction typically are later day peaks? I have not looked into that. That's a really good question. I didn't know. I don't know if that's a tendency among neurotypical, among, how do you say? Well, Alyssa said it. Let's see. Around people with executive dysfunction and people with ADHD. Neurodivergent. Thank you. Thank you. People who are neurodivergent. I don't know. So that's a really good thing to look into. Thanks for raising that as a question. Cool. If there aren't any more technical questions, we'll take a 5-minute break and come back on the 53 of your hour, depending on where you are. And we'll hear from Alyx on the menstrual cycle. So give it a minute.
See everyone in 5 minutes.
All right, you're back.
Back. You still have a minute.
Yes. Don't need to rush people.
I was enjoying a snack. I was
Yeah.
enjoying some almonds and cashew.
Very healthy.
It's just what I had close by. So I'm like just a little snack. See, we're all about listening to your bodies during
Right.
this class.
That's right. We'll get the Cheetos afterwards.
Hot Cheetos. They're like, I love them
I heard.
in moderation because they.
You have Alyssa asked a question following up on the
Mhm.
ADHD question. Well, we're just waiting, giving people another minute to get back here, but she asks, Elizabeth, because I was listening to an ADHD podcast with an expert who indicated that these individuals' rhythms typically activate approximately 3 hours later in the day than neurotypicals, which contributes to more difficulty leaving the house on time.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. I definitely believe that.
Yeah.
There's a ton of emerging research too around ADHD with the menstrual cycle because of the interplays with serotonin, which we tend to have more serotonin when we have estrogen dominant during the first half of the cycle. And so people can experience almost like can experience PMDD or more extreme PMS in the second half because of the way that an ADHD brain interacts with estrogen and serotonin. And so people's medication doesn't always work as well or at all during different parts of their cycle.
Sure.
So if they're not connecting those dots, has a huge impact on the level of success of those medications.
I believe that. Yep. It's a whole other challenge, I imagine, with that diagnosis. So with that being said, Alyx, why don't you dive into menstrual cycle syncing?
Let's do it. I'm super excited. I love learning. So I'm just like pumped up after that fantastic session from Elizabeth. Like, oh my gosh, we've got to create a guide together or something. I feel like there's a collaboration coming. So keep your eyes out because it's so good. So good. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and we're going to talk about how you can be a cycle savvy professional, how you can really start to take this information about your bodies and really use that. And this honestly, so much goes hand in hand with the ChronoPace. And I'm curious how our ChronoPace or type even changes throughout the cycle, because I know there are times for me, I need more sleep or less sleep, or I wake up earlier during the cycle just because what is going on hormonally. So we're going to go for days on this stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's all about tuning into yourself as the ultimate authority on your body, and then really using that information to inform your work, your life, and everything else that you've got going on. So just really high level, what we're going to be talking about today is how to use the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle or the moon cycle to impact your business or your work if you don't have a business, right? Including growth and revenue. So we're going to go over the 4 levels of the menstrual cycle. We're going to talk about the talents and skill sets of each phase of the cycle. And we're going to look at some self-care to support yourself when things may feel out of alignment. As Elizabeth was saying, we have to look at our body, but then also accommodate for reality. So we can't always change the world yet based on our menstrual cycle. But there is a lot we can do to fill in some of those gaps and still feel really great if our life is calling us to show up to something that we may not feel mentally or physically prepared for at that time. And then we'll take some time for questions. What I really want to start off with, please put this in the chat. How do you feel when you think about your period, or just hear the word periods, or any of this chat about menstruation? Like, what's your gut reaction when you hear those things? Would love to. If anyone feels brave and bold, it would be awesome to see your answers in the chat. Because while I am now completely and totally deeply in the world of periods, menstrual equity, menstrual cycle, and cycle syncing, I did not start off that way. And if you would have told my 10-year-old self that I was going to run a company about periods someday, I would have been completely freaked out and mortified, because it was the last thing I thought that I should be talking about. That was absolutely the message that I received. So we're getting some stuff in the chat. I think feel fine, but I think I should feel private or slightly embarrassed. Yep. Cramps. And also, yes, embarrassment. My initial thought is, ugh. Someone don't sneeze. That's hilarious. Yeah. So there are some pretty visceral responses that come from years of indoctrination in a system that is completely set up for the way that men's bodies work. Men's bodies really repeat hormonally on a 24-hour rhythm, whereas women and menstruating people's bodies have a hormonal pattern that impact our mood, our energy, our physiology, that lasts anywhere from 21 to 35, 40 days. And so we've just been really kind of ingrained with this idea that our body type is wrong. And just like the ChronoPace, it's not good or bad, it's just different. There are just different programming that our bodies experience, and they do change throughout our lifetime as well. So before we dive into the 4 phases, I really want to go over my top 3 challenges that I've seen with people actually applying menstrual cycle and cycle syncing work in their own lives. Challenge number 1, I just kind of alluded it to a few seconds ago, actually, but the challenge is that we are set up in a world that really focuses and honors the 24-hour pattern, which is how men bodies work, and our bodies don't work that way. We have different levels of hormones throughout the days and throughout our months. And where men are hormonally similar every single day of the year, women are hormonally similar about 12 days out of every year, 1 day in each of their cycles. So this is a pretty big challenge, not because our bodies are like that, but because we're constantly put up against this other type of programming and pattern. So we're made to feel kind of bad or wrong or squeamish about the way our bodies just naturally work. Challenge number 2 that we see a lot, particularly in the world of work, is the productivity tools that exist were made by people who don't have cycles. Were made by people. All of these companies are male founded. Most of the top sales tools in the world, most of the top sales experts are men. So they just have a complete blind spot because their physiology does not ask that of them, or their physiology does not change in that way. And so they are lauded as the expert, the only way to do things, the best practices. And we just find ourselves not matching up with that. It's something that I saw for myself. It's something that I've seen with hundreds of other women that I've worked with. Is again, this made to feel bad or wrong just because our bodies work in a different way, and they're not even cognizant of it. So all of these tools are set up for that 24-hour wash, rinse, repeat. Let's get going and do the same thing, which Elizabeth just showed you all how is a completely ineffective way to work anyway. And then we've got this double whammy on top of that by being people in a cyclical body. And the third challenge, really, and in terms of accessing the power to cycle sync and accessing this awareness about your body, is that over 58% of women feel embarrassed from being on their period. This is a very recent study, and it's true today. It's true even in some of those responses that we saw at the beginning, that kind of cringy feeling when we think about periods. And we spend on average 8 years of our life with the bleed portion of our menstrual cycle. So if you spend 8 years of your life feeling kind of embarrassed and feeling kind of cringy, that impacts the way we work, the way we show up to work, that impacts how we feel about ourselves, and it impacts the way that we show up to our lives. So that is a huge amount of potential and power that we end up giving away because we've been taught to fear or be kind of grossed out by something that is natural and normal. And this doesn't even go into hormonal related conditions, because I know folks have challenges with having discomfort or uncomfortable periods, but a lot of that is really caused by not having access to the resources they need to have a healthy, happy menstrual cycle. And that is a whole other chat that we could get into, and something we are desperately trying to support with the Agenda.Period, having access to the right information that people need to feel good each and every phase of their cycle. But all of these things are really compounding us and make it challenging to work in flow and work with our cycle. So let's dive into the 4 phases. So I'm curious if you have heard of the 4 phases before. When I started the Agenda.Period, I thought I was late to the party. I found out this connection between my work and my ovulation. I actually found that I had the highest sales during the ovulation phase of my menstrual cycle. And then I started to learn that my physiology was different throughout the 4 phases. And so when we first created the content for this, I thought I was pretty late to the party and that everyone was just going to be like, oh yeah, I know about that. I got the 4 phases down. And when we took the content out to workshops and to events, people were like, the follicular who? The luteal what? Oh, you mean that like horrible PMS time? Like what? Like we're just lacking even in the basic understanding and language around how our bodies shift and change. So the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, for that introduction, in case you need one, we start off with the menstrual cycle. So this is the first phase of our cycle. This is the first day that you have flow, actual menstrual blood, not some of the spotting that might come before, but the first day of actual menstrual flow, that is day 1 of a new cycle. This is when our hormones are at their lowest point. So you may feel a little bit tired or drained during this time. Then we move into the follicular phase. This is when our energy is on the rise. Then we're into the ovulation phase, which can be super potent and high energy time. And then we come back down the other side to the luteal phase, which is actually the longest phase in the cycle. So we're going to talk about all of them a little bit more in depth. So the menstrual phase is the beginning of your cycle, the time when you are bleeding. And this can feel like our inner winter time. So you may feel quiet. You may feel a little bit like hibernation, especially at the beginning. You may feel more inward. It can also feel uncomfortable. You can feel drained. You can feel tired. And this can be accompanied by a high amount of pain. And I just want to let everyone know that while this pain is very common, it is not normal. Our period should not be extremely painful. There's actually an indicator in your health that there is something going on below the surface that could use some care and attention. And unfortunately, we're just taught by doctors that it's just normal to have really sucky periods. It's normal to feel a lot of pain, a high level of pain, and to take a high level of pain medication in order to reduce those symptoms. And that's just not true. When our cycle is going in the way that it should not, it might be a little uncomfortable, but it should not be extremely painful. So that's an indicator to you that there's some support that is needed in order to balance things back out. In terms of business and work, we like to take this as a time for our planning, to actually sit down, to kind of think about how things went in the last month. It may be a good time to meditate if that's something that you're into, analyze what you can let go of and what is kind of coming up for you in the cycle ahead. And this is not a time to get into a gung-ho mode of planning, but it's more like plotting some things out for yourself. If you had a particularly tough luteal phase in the last cycle, you can go ahead and block some time off for yourself in the cycle to come. Put some little of what I like to call red flags for yourself. So just give yourself that time and awareness to be with yourself and to think about what's coming up next in your life and in your business, and really start to put some of those plot points. So I love that Elizabeth shared her calendar. Great time to pull up your Google Calendar. If you use the Agenda.Period, your menstrual cycle information is going to be plotted in there for you. So you can just pull up the cycle to come and say, okay, last time during the luteal phase, I did not like that, or I didn't really feel great doing that during the follicular phase. I'm going to make sure I don't schedule that essential work right during that time. I'm going to adjust it and see how that feels, and really just start to take good notes for yourself. In terms of self-care, it is a great time to take time off, to do some journaling, to do some meditation, and try to carve out a little bit of a cave for yourself if possible. Sometime where you're not in charge of dinner. Maybe that's the night you ask your partner to take care of that, or you order in, or do something that kind of simplifies that for you so you can feel some time to rest. I'm not going to go a ton into it during this presentation, but I just want to put it out here that there are also ways to really tap into the fitness and exercise portion based on our muscle recovery and based on what is good for our bodies. So we can actually have higher injuries if we try to hit it really hard in the gym during menstruation. A coach was actually telling me 90% of their player injuries happen when they're on their period, just because of the way our structure, our inflammation, just like literally everything is tied to the menstrual cycle if you have one. And so this is a great time to tune into what your body's asking and to not push yourself very intensely during this time, because your body is doing a lot of work. It is detoxifying, it is shedding the endometrium. So you need that opportunity for rest and support. Then we move to the follicular phase. So this can feel like our inner spring time. This is when your ovaries are actually starting to prepare an egg for ovulation. And so you may feel that increase of energy, extroversion, you may feel more positive. I find that this is the time that things roll off my back. If someone says something snarky, I don't take it as personally because we've got lots of estrogen on our side working with serotonin. So we tend to not take things as personally during this time. And you also may feel more confident. So this is a great time to begin doing the plan that you put in place during your menstrual phase. So actually sitting down and getting to it, particularly the social aspect of work, can feel really good and really easy during this time. And I would say that's kind of the overall umbrella, I think, of both of these types of programming, is like, how can we be focusing on what feels the best for our bodies? Because when it feels good, when we feel excited doing the work, it's going to come easier, and we're going to have those better results. So this is a great time during the follicular phase to actually start to put the plan in place. Mapping out your ideas, going to networking, having those meetings, doing some brainstorming. Really great time to actually start doing that work during the follicular phase. And just a little personal anecdote, I find that it's, again, more of that external work. If I were to sit down and try to do my accounting or my taxes or some of those sustaining activities during this phase of the cycle that are more nitpicky or detail oriented, they don't always work well for me. So that's why this content is a great baseline for you to explore from, because you may be the complete opposite from the way that it really works well for me. So getting to understand how your cycle maps to these different recommendations is important. And then again, self-care, a great time to do waxing. We don't have the same reaction to pain. So that's why waxing is a tip during the follicular phase. Kind of taking those leaps of faith, because we've got estrogen on our side. We are going to bounce back if things don't go necessarily as anticipated with more ease. And a great time to do a little bit more intensity on your workouts. Your body will accommodate that well, and it will feel good to move the energy in that way. Ovulation is the next phase of the cycle. So while the egg is only viable for 24 hours, there is a batch of time, typically between 3 to 7 days, depending on your physiology, that you will have fertile quality cervical mucus. And so theoretically, sperm could stay alive in that mucus and you could still get pregnant later on. So it's this whole time frame and phase where we have the most heightened energy. It's kind of the peak of this cycle. And we tend to feel confident. Great time for sales, a great time to do presentations. Our face is the most symmetrical during ovulation. We have different hormones and chemicals that we're giving off because our bodies want to be pregnant, even if our brains do not want to be pregnant. So they're kind of pushing like the grooviness out during this phase. And this can feel like a really great time for some folks. For me, I'm a highly extroverted person, so I love the ovulation phase. But we found with some of our more introverted clients and customers that they don't always like the ovulation phase because their body may be really pushing them to do something that doesn't feel like it is in their most natural or aligned self. So I think that's really interesting to know as well. So much of this is going to change person to person, which is why we encourage your own exploration. So it's a good time to batch content if you want to record a bunch of videos, if you're on TikTok or Instagram or whatever the case may be, put out some reels and then save them in your drafts and drip them out later when you're going to feel really great about it. If you work for a different organization, it is a great time to ask for a raise when you are in the ovulation phase, and also a great time for clients and to onboard people into your organization. We tend to feel very social during this time again. And it's also the time we've noticed for parents, and I have noticed this since coming into my own parenting journey, that parenting can feel the easiest. It's easy to say yes to other people during ovulation. And so that's just something to know about yourself. Because one of my early workshops, a mom said, "Oh, like I finally get it. Why I feel so guilty during the luteal phase is because I was mom of the world, best mom of the year during ovulation. I was taking them to the park, making all the snacks, doing all the activities like without breaking a sweat. And now I don't want to be touched and I don't want to talk to anybody. And it was really this disassociating feeling for both myself and my children. Like we didn't really understand, and everyone kind of felt rejected and like their feelings were hurt. Now I can just understand there are certain times when it feels easier to be in that super mom flow. And I just let them know, hey, this is what's going on. They are just brought into the fold and they're made aware. And so that we don't have to feel rejected. We don't have to feel guilty. We can just understand that these things are in flow and in a fluctuation. Also a great time for HIIT or high impact exercises. You may feel like really like going out and taking a big run. If that's something that you're into, I am not, but just a great time to use some of that extra energy. We are prone to have dance parties in my house all the time, but especially during ovulation phase. And then we come to the last phase of the cycle, which is the luteal phase. So this is the phase where your body releases progesterone from the corpus luteum to support a potential pregnancy. This is the phase where we tend to see people during the first week of the luteal phase have a high intensity of energy, but maybe feel a little bit more internal. And then around day 23, day 24, I would actually highly encourage you to track this. There's this drop off. And I started tracking for a long time, and it kind of became a joke in our office that day, oh, Alyx is on day 24. Because when I get to day 24 of my period, I can't stand anyone, or of my cycle, I can't stand anyone. And I would get so snappy in meetings and I just didn't want to talk. I was like, everyone's an idiot, which is clearly not true. I was like, maybe this is a me problem. I kept tracking it and it kept happening every day on day 24. Well, this is when our around day 23, 24, 25, depending on the length of your cycle, our hormones have a drop off. So this is where you did not get pregnant and our hormones drop and you're about 4 to 5 to 6 days away from your period. And so that feeling is when we can actually dump into almost like that PMS time of the cycle. And that can continue on until our period happens. And it's because of that shift of our hormones and that drop in our hormones that we can feel very irritable and angry, and then get those lovely PMS symptoms that come up. So the luteal phase gets a bad rap, and kind of the entire thing is looked at as the PMS phase, but we found it's really that second week of the cycle that can use additional care and support. And we may feel highly sensitive or upset by different people's reactions or moods. So when you know that about yourself, again, you can just be a little bit more intentional about your planning, shift around meetings, shift around some different content for yourself, and really feel some support through that. It doesn't have to feel like it takes you off guard once you just know to look out for it. The luteal phase is also a great time, again, for that small, detailed work, admin, accounting, scheduling events, decluttering your email. I do this every single month in the luteal phase. I will get sick of the 300 read emails that I have, and I just wipe them out. I put them into folders or I delete them. The same with my house, the same with my car. It's just a really great time to clear out the clutter that accumulates in our lives. So definitely would recommend doing that during this time. And then for self-care, going to bed early, being careful about our caffeine consumption, spending time to connect with nature, and maybe tuning in more to yoga, walking, some of those relaxing movements. So I haven't seen any questions pop into the chat, but if you've got any questions so far, I would be happy to answer them. I know it's a ton of information about the cycle. So maybe I'll just pause for a second and see if anything pops up. All right, we'll keep the questions coming. Start them really, and we'll happy to answer more at the end. So this again, kind of like Elizabeth's presentation, is like, oh, that sounds cool, but how would I actually use this as a practical application? What would this actually look like as a small business owner or as someone in an organization? Because I'm not just counting on myself, I'm counting on all of these other people. I'm counting on all of this other outside interaction. So I wanted to just talk through a practical application and what it looked like when I was building my coaching practice. So I really got into this flow where I knew the amount of clients that I wanted to have in my practice, and they were on different lengths of time, typically 3 to 6 month long contracts. And I found, probably part to do with my chronotype, but like how much I could do in a week that felt good and felt realistic for me in terms of that high intensity one-on-one interaction. And so once I knew that, I would know, okay, I've got some clients that are wrapping up in about a month and a half. I would like to onboard some new clients into my practice. So what this would look like, I would sit down on my period and I would take some time to meditate in terms of what kind of funnel filler would I like to do. So this is going to really depend business to business, but for me, what really worked well to fill my coaching practice was to do talks and workshops. I loved to go out. This is obviously pre-COVID, but go out into the community, work with different organizations, and just host really fun talks for groups of women. And so on my period, I would sit down and really think about what's present for me right now. What is the kind of talk I would like to do? What is information that I've been seeing really supportive to my clients right now? And how could I bundle that into a masterclass or a workshop that would be highly impactful for people to come to? And so I would do that planning during my period. And then in the follicular phase, after I'd kind of mapped out some of my dots, I would actually start calling organizations. I would say, hey, we've done a workshop before. I would love to offer this workshop to your organization. How does that sound? Or reach out to people at networking and find where I was going to be holding this workshop. And then I would always plan my workshop during the ovulation phase, because it just felt so easy and so good to be out in front of people and to be highly energetic during that time, as well as mapping up follow-up calls for the couple of days after that initial workshop. People have the most enthusiasm right after they have taken a workshop or a masterclass, and then they were interested in seeing what it would be like to work with me. So I would plan all of that out months in advance. And sometimes it takes a couple of cycles to get this totally all put together, but I would plan those calls and that follow-up right after the workshop when I was still in that ovulation flow. And then depending on who said yes and what that program looked like, I would work on analyzing and organizing and really onboarding them during the luteal phase, and then get them started into their coaching program and plan. And doing it like this, making my work like this, increased my customer acquisition. I think I had a 95% customer acquisition when I was working in this flow. I don't work on onboarding clients anymore, but it was just this potency of working with that cycle and intuitively working with my body. And it just felt so much easier than when I was banging my head against the wall, trying to go out every single day and get new clients to fill my practice. It was just, it was just a lot easier. Oh, I don't know why I skipped ahead. It was a lot easier when I started to understand these connection points and then really work with them. So what can you do if it is impossible for you to sync with your cycle? When life requires you to do something outside of the current phase that you're in, we really like to give ourselves grace. We know that the world is not always going to connect well and make it easy for us to connect to the cycle. So really just release that pressure to get it perfect. And with the menstrual cycle, you've got 12 of them each year. So there's lots of time to practice and find what works for you. Understanding the self-care piece is really important. So if the day felt like a total wash, what can you do to reset yourself at night? How can you give yourself some additional care if you were being called to do tasks that felt very much out of alignment? And then the last two kind of go together: patience and planning for next time. We are not taught how to work with our cyclical selves. We are not taught that we can even plan with our physiology in this way. It's just completely out of our cultural conversation right now. So it may just take some time to understand your own baseline and your own flow so that you can feel really, really fantastic. Question came in: does this change once you are perimenopausal or periods start changing? They're closer together, further apart? Yes, it does. And so some people feel themselves in this what we call a free range, or maybe a little bit of an irregular cycle. And so if your period goes away in perimenopause or into menopause, you can track with the phases of the moon as a guide for yourself. So you can like, let's say you don't have a period right now, you can start to plan around the new moon. And we've got some content about this in the app. I didn't go fully into it today, but there are ways to still find those anchor points for yourself that have been really, really helpful for the people that we work with. That's a great question. And so, yeah, just a little peek at the Agenda app, and we're about to release a completely new version in 2 days. So this is super duper exciting, but really at the heartbeat of it, we help folks track, and understand their schedule and understand the 4 phases and what benefits come with each of the 4 phases. There is a ton of educational content so that you can help yourself fill in some of those gaps, the things that you should have learned all along about the cycle. And then we connect it with your Google Calendar so that you can start to optimize your life and your work with your cycle, making the seemingly invisible really visible and tangible in your everyday life. So that is all I've got. And I know we've got some great Q&A coming, and please also keep your questions coming.
Alyx, that was really fun. I put in the chat that I feel fine and good about my period, but I feel like I should be private or slightly embarrassed. But I love having open conversations about this because it's real and it affects all of us. And so it's a really fun conversation. And I think Kavitha translated, Alyssa had a question. She said, perhaps due to perimenopause or hyperthyroidism or both, her cycle has increased to every 3 weeks, but then this month it went back to 4 weeks, and the fluctuation makes it hard to plan. Any recommendations?
Yeah, when I've not gone through that experience, I've not gone through perimenopause, but I went through a pregnancy and I didn't have the period anymore, and things felt very unpredictable, especially as I've become obsessed with cycle syncing. And so for that cycle to just be gone, even though knowing it's for a good reason or that we're just in a different stage of life, felt really disorienting. So I definitely tuned into the moon phases. And then I did more of a daily, we call it like the cycle check-in. I really tapped into my emotional experience and my physical experience each day to understand and try to orient to that energy, knowing I didn't have this marcation of the cycle that I had before. And so that's something I really would encourage, is to come back to yourself when you are in one of those periods of flux or uncertainty, is how can you stay connected into your own body by doing a more of a daily check-in. It doesn't super duper help with your planning, but I think if we do the daily cycle check-in plus a lot of grace, just knowing that you're in a transitional period can help. And there's a great book I could point you to. A dear friend, Kate Codrington, just released a book called Second Spring, and it is a book and a guide for supporting yourself through perimenopause and into menopause. So it would be a really, really powerful resource to check out. Kate's fantastic. So definitely take a peek at that book. And yeah, that's enough to chew on, I think, to start.
Great. And Alyx, can you type that name of the book in the chat just so people have it?
Actually just did.
Oh, great. Okay. While we're waiting for more questions to come in, Elizabeth, do you want to give a reminder of how people can connect with you and work with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I managed to snag what is it, like LinkedIn something Elizabeth Knox. So I am the first Elizabeth Knox that snagged their name on LinkedIn, which has never happened before. So LinkedIn is the best place to find me. And then we primarily work with organizations because, as I mentioned, we want organizations to be aware and pacing themselves in a healthy, sustainable manner. And then executive coaching and certified diversity coaching are the main ways people can work with MatchPace and with me.
Great. And Alyx, what about you? What's the best way to find you, to work with you?
Agenda.Period.com everywhere, on our website, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, and then on Facebook, we've got a closed community called the Cycle Reintroduction. So it's a great place to get questions on products ranging from any kind of period product, supplement, questions about perimenopause, questions about pregnancy, really just this hormonal health hub that people come to, other women and menstruators come to support each other. It's a really fantastic space. So we'd love to see you there as well.
Great. And don't be shy. we've only been talking about periods, so we should all feel comfortable with each other. So feel free to ask some questions in the Q&A or in the chat. I have a question. I'm a full-on Gen Xer. 50 is closer to me than 40, and getting into that ready for body, still getting my periods. But what prompted you guys to pull this together, I guess, Elizabeth, and to find Alyx and so forth? Because I just think this is such an innovative way to think about the way we work and understand our bodies, etc. So how this whole collaboration piece came together.
I can't remember if I mentioned it when everybody had joined, but my mom gave me a book on my cycle, probably when I was in my early 20s. It was called The Venus Week. And so it kind of, and I haven't looked at it in a long time, so I don't know how, but it really introduced me to this concept of you have this 1 week where you feel amazing, and you think that that's the 1 week that you feel normal. Like you make it seem like your best is normal. And it really broke down that like, yeah, you can leverage that week, and you need to be aware of the benefits in all phases of the cycle. And so that has really helped me professionally. I did, it wasn't natural family planning, but whatever it was, like I tracked my cycle when my husband and I were trying to conceive. So I knew about all of these things, and I watch myself when I have, when I'm in my luteal phase, and then especially that second week. And then just coaching women and recognizing that they generally don't have this knowledge of themselves. A lot of the women that I've run into, and I was like, we need to get this information out there, because it really does impact us professionally. And then it's a really good matchup with the body clock that we do. And so I found Alyx somewhere and reached out. And so that's how the collaboration came about.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions out there? Lots of thank yous.
No, nothing.
Yep. I think you got a great job of answering, I think, a lot of questions us females had. I would say, in digesting the chronotype and the menstrual cycle, sometimes there are just things that are planned, meetings and so forth. And you both touched on that. Any other questions on how to respond to that? And also, as we're trying to make changes in the workplace, what other kinds of support would you suggest that we bring to our managers and leaders and organizations, big and small?
Yeah. Alyx, I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, I think when someone sends you, we almost have this idea that we can't say no to something, or we just have to say like, okay, yeah, that'll work for me. And we are ridiculously accommodating. And when we start to put those red flags onto our calendar and we start to understand our cycle, we can just suggest a new time without anyone knowing the reason that you're asking to change a meeting. People have things that come up. People have other meetings. So if someone requests time from you, you don't have to say yes. You can actually pause before you respond to that email, mark it as unread again, go check in with the situation. Because I know I used to be like such a yes person, and it was always at the expense of myself, at the expense of my own energy. Yeah, sure, I'll meet at 7 a.m. No, I'm not gonna, like, unless it's like the president, I'm not meeting at 7 a.m. right? Like I'm just not doing like, hey, that time actually doesn't work for me. I've got something else in my schedule. How about we meet at X time instead? So starting to advocate for ourselves in those ways, I think really encourage us to take the pause first, and then we can check in and see what is actually going to be in best service to ourselves. And I think that's kind of my biggest takeaway. And then for employers or organizations is to start or maybe continue what happened in the pandemic and allow people to have the flexibility of understanding themselves and understanding when their best work occurs, and trusting them to still get their stuff done within that more flexible framework, because we're going to see better results.
Yep. Thank you for that.
So I'm still in the people pleasing / world or whatever, and just realize, so actually the past 3 months I have had travel that has come up right in my luteal phase. One was my kids' spring break. It was Easter. I can't say like, oh, sorry, that's not a good time for me. School, can you please reschedule the spring break? One was going away with some friends, and we were trying so hard to get everybody's schedules together. And then one is a work conference. And so I can't move those, and I can choose if I want to extract myself from them, but I don't want to. But what I do know is that then I need to be really careful with myself. Like I need to go to bed early. I cannot stretch myself on those days. So I can still go, but I can't stay up until 3 a.m., you know, not with my kids. My kids, thankfully, don't stay up that late, even my night owl. But, you know, it would be really nice when I'm going to this conference to just feel like I can, you know, enjoy being up with everybody late, but that won't be good for me. So I don't want to say no to these things. You know, sometimes their client needs, you know, right in my luteal phase, right in the afternoon, and I can't always say no. But because I can identify those things about myself, I know how to be kinder to myself, and I know how to enable myself to show up, even in spite of my natural tendencies. So.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions. So are there any closing remarks or last comments for us to take away during this very powerful informational session?
No, I'm just glad for the people who came, and I'm excited for more women and menstruators to have access to this information.
Right. I can't wait for that word to be like menstruators and not feel a tiny cringe at that. Right? Like that should just be a normalized thing. And that's what I hope for, you know, my daughters that are still really young, to be living in a world like that. So great. Well, with that, thank you everyone for coming, and for all the comments, and thank you, Elizabeth and Alyx.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Right. Bye-bye.
Hang on one second. All right. Alyx, you still there?
Yep.
Okay. I'm kicking Heather. I'm kicking you out. I don't know if you can still hear me. All right. And I will stop recording.